Theology. Unplugged.
Hey friends, welcome to Theology Unplugged. I'm Michael Patton, and today we're going to be doing a special session on Christianity in the news. Also, the reason why I'm doing this is because I'm not quite done. I'm still not quite done with my preparations for the Through Theology in a Year, where I defend the hard cessationist position. It's not that I'm changing a whole lot. I do have some new charts and graphs that's coming up. It's just kind of getting reacquainted with the mindset on all sides, and sometimes it's hard, even though you've been involved there. I've been involved in it for so long, and it's not as if I am not acquainted with it in my own personal life, because it is very important to me, this idea of whether or not the gifts still continue. But we'll get back to that soon enough. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some news items today, kind of a hodgepodge of news items. This is really just to make sure I get something out there today, and to cover some of the stuff, number one, that I've been covering recently in other forms of medium, like on my Patreon. Just about everything goes on my Patreon, and sometimes I cross-post it over to credohouse.org, because credohouse.org is still by far the biggest, the most trafficked area that we have. I mean, really by very far. Because I've been writing in it since 2006, and so it's got a lot of Google, high priority Google search items. So whenever people, for instance, look for what does the second commandment really mean, or the third commandment really mean, something like that, mine will always come up first, or at least have a high priority. And so that gives me a lot of traffic. So, I really need to be using that. And so I'm trying to cross-post some of the main articles over to there, just to make sure that it is still populated. And so that can be an entry point into our ministry. Not only is it a staple of our ministry, and I think there's a lot of good stuff. I mean, 3,000 articles on credohouse.org that I've been writing over the years, and I think they're good articles. I mean, some of them are just my kind of musings, but some of them are really well thought out, from my standpoint, well thought out articles on significant issues in theology. So check out credohouse.org sometime whenever you got time. And again, support us on Patreon. That is where I get my support. This is how I make my living. This is the primary way. You can go to credoministries.org. Let's see if I have that up here. credoministries.org. It's not showing up there, but go to credoministries.org and you can donate there if you want to just give a donation. But if you want to become a member, this is the place where I primarily get my support. Not that I don't get support from credoministries.org's donations as well. But anyway, so I want to start by going over a couple of the articles that I have written recently and give you guys just kind of a commentary on them. Not only to tell you what the article's about, just in case you haven't read it, but I think it's fun to go through it by teaching in this way just as well as by writing it out. It helps me to stay kind of refined on the issue. I wrote it was a very short article, and it was about this graphic right here. I find graphics all the time that I follow a lot of unbelievers, atheists, primarily people that were one time part of the faith, but are no longer part of the faith. Kind of these people, as I'll talk about in a minute, deconstructed Christians. But these are the types of things that they will put out. Many times atheists will put this out, but this particular one had to be one of my deconstructed Christian friends who deconstructed and never came back to Christianity. But this is, here, I'll read it to you. The Bible begins with a talking snake, Genesis 3:1, and finishes with a seven-headed monster, Apocalypse 13:1. Then believers get angry if you say the Bible is a book of fiction. So it's meant to be humorous. It's meant to, have an emotional impact. These are not necessarily ad hominems attacking a person by calling it names, but it's attacking a teaching by calling it names. So it's basically the same fallacy. I know we all do it and we have fun with it. I don't want to over criticize it, but these types of things are effective. They really are. They will get somebody dislodged from their faith. They will make people who have not really worked through their faith get into a time of doubt. Not that that's a bad thing, because we need to go through a time of deconstruction, as I'll talk about in a minute. But that is, that is the graphic that I wanted to bring up a very important topic that I think is great for us to look at, because this has to do, and I've talked about this a lot before. I did a whole podcast on it back in 2012, I think it was, but it was just the bizarre argument. It's the old bizarre argument. That's what I call it. This cannot be true because it is bizarre. And this is often used. It's just, like I said, an ad hominem attacking the teaching by laughing at it, by looking at some of the more outlandish or supernatural or details of the Bible or the Christian faith that we hold to, but just golly, in a real world are far-fetched. You wouldn't believe it. But that's what a miracle is. That's what, when we talk about miracles, if it wasn't stuff like this, if it was just all very natural stuff, then what's the difference between Christianity and naturalism? One of the things that we have is not only do we have the establishment of the world by God and his building into the world, how the world is going to work in a natural way, but also God's intervention. And it's because of God's intervention that we ultimately believe in Christianity and believe in Christ. And so without these things, it would just be funny. Just think of a Christianity devoid of all demythologized. That's what they used to call it back in the 50s and 60s. They would demythologize the Bible and give it back to us in such a way there was not any mythology. And then you got nothing. You don't have a faith anymore, because there's nothing unique to it that doesn't fit into every other naturalistic worldview. But with Christianity, we do have things like this. Now, I admit that can be effective. I admit that saying there's a talking snake, not that I necessarily believe there was a talking snake, but I'm going to go ahead and say there was a talking snake, and not because many people look at this and say it was a seraph, which is basically a seraphim, which is an angel, and it was a talking angel rather than a talking snake. There's all kinds of different views that they have for it, but and there's all kinds of things you could bring up about it, but I'm just going to go ahead and say it was a talking snake, right? Just like we have a talking donkey, and we have Jonah being swallowed by a whale. We got all kinds of axe head floating, Red Seas parting, all kinds of crazy stuff. This is called the bizarre argument. And the bizarre argument, whenever you think about it from a logical standpoint, is not effective at all. It can't be effective. It doesn't even have any central points to its argument. It doesn't work. There is no argument for the bizarre argument. It's basically this. I've wrote it down in two premise and a conclusion. Premise one, bizarre things cannot be true. Premise two, therefore, there are bizarre things in the Bible. Conclusion, therefore the Bible is not true. That's basically it. It really is. Bizarre things cannot be true. That premise one is loaded with all kinds of stuff that makes no sense at all, no logical sense. This is not a logical argument. This is ultimately an emotional argument, but it's not one without precedent in our daily lives, because we don't go around believing things that are out of the ordinary. Another way to put it would be out of the ordinary things are not true. The Bible has out of ordinary things, therefore the Bible is not true. Or Christianity has out of ordinary things in our witness in our daily lives through church history, therefore Christianity can't be true. It doesn't work. Number one, we talk about the word bizarre, and what does it really mean? Ultimately, here's another premise with a conclusion. Premise number one, things I have not seen are not true. Premise two, I have not seen the things in the Bible. Conclusion, the Bible is not true. You see how that works? things I have not seen are not true. And that's really what a lot of this stuff comes down to. It's just saying, golly, that is so outlandish. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen a snake talk. We don't have that in our nature today. And so that would be funny. I mean, just to see a snake start talking, that would be funny. It would draw out a laugh rather than a sense of normality. We work on normality. That's how we work every day. We do not recognize any longer at all, and maybe we never really did because we grow up with this, and it takes us time to reflect to be able to see how incredibly, and let's put it this way, how incredibly bizarre everything in this world is. I mean, from the way in which a cell works. You know, you go through that. I was going through some of that stuff recently, and all the just how busy a cell is all the time. Trillions and trillions of cells, and I'm very glad they're busy. They're doing a lot of work on my behalf. I'm not telling it to work. It's just giving nutrients, cleaning stuff out, making things function, creating connections. It is just amazing the way cells works and how your brain works, how the eyeball works. Everything, whenever it comes down to this, is bizarre. It really is. It's absolutely outlandish. It sounds stupid, except for we've seen it every day. We feel it every day. We benefit from it every day. It becomes part of the normality, not part of the non-bizarrity, if you will. I remember whenever I was watching my kid being born, the first one, I couldn't believe that it was actually true. This is the way that it happens. And it seems so incredibly bizarre. Anybody who's seen your child born, you understand what I'm talking about. You're like, whoa. This is really happening. I've never seen anything like this. Now, I've heard about it a lot. I know that it happens because I'm in existence. Other people are in existence, so it's less bizarre. But just think if that was the first time you ever saw it. Just think if an alien came down and aliens were created, directly by God or some other way besides this, and they come down and they see somebody giving birth to a child. They say, this is crazy. This can't be. Why? Because it's not normal in our universe. It's not normal for my thinking. Think of dinosaurs. I think of dinosaurs, and I think those are the most bizarre creatures ever. I mean, not only are they incredibly large, but they are weird looking. Like a Tyrannosaurus Rex, he's got little short hands, man. I mean, it's and a big old mouth. I look at it, I'm like, man, that is not a function. That's not very functional. That doesn't seem like a great design, Lord, but it is funny. It is good. It is interesting in a lot of ways. I don't know what happened. I have to believe that these things were true unless there's some massive conspiracy going around that people are just creating fake bones, maybe to make the earth, I don't know, just maybe in some way to deny the Bible, because the Bible doesn't talk about dinosaurs. Or at least most people don't think it talks about dinosaurs. I don't want to push that. Somebody's yelling and throwing stuff at the screen right now because they see Leviathan and Behemoth in the book of Job. But anyway, it's just crazy to look at these things, to look at some of the creatures. Have you ever seen some of the sea creatures we find? Some of the things that aren't discovered yet and that all of a sudden become discovered? Some of these fish that look like a man's face. I saw one of those the other day. Freaked me out. I mean, it was probably a little bit deformed, but at the same time, it freaked me out. I mean, it was like, this can't be real. Some of the things that we see that we're not familiar with, and they first get exposed to us, we get blown away. Some of these butterflies that, they camouflage themselves just absolutely perfectly in all situations. It's just amazing to me. It seems so incredibly bizarre, except for that it is true and part of our nature. So it gets taken out of that category of bizarre eventually. We see it all the time. It's normal. But if we hadn't seen it, does that make it any less true? And I mean, whenever we're talking about this, number one, what I'm saying here, that it makes no sense to say bizarre things cannot be true, because all we're saying is things that are not normal to my life cannot be true. That's absolutely false. There's no way to defend premise one at either one of the syllogisms that I created. So you would have to do that. But the thing is, this everything, we've got, not only is that not true, but we've got a God who we say and we believe and out of necessity must have supernatural power and can do whatever he wants. So if he wanted to create just one snake that talked, and you said there's no way that could happen, that'd be impossible, Well, it's just funny you guys believe such ridiculous things. We already believe in the existence of the world. We already believe in the resurrection of Christ. We already believe in the intervention of God multiple times throughout history, and we also believe all of these future things that are coming that are absolutely amazing and are going to blow us away, because of the excitement we have of being in a world without sin. And to be without sin is going to be the most bizarre thing you've ever experienced. It really is. I think that's true. I think I can accurately say that whenever we get to the new earth, we're not going to be looking around and seeing if God created something new or being able to see something he already created we just hadn't seen yet, because we have God to guide us to these things. It is going to be the feeling of being without sin. It'll be absolutely bizarre. But the good old bizarre argument is effective, I admit. And sometimes Christians do that to other religions, and we need to keep from doing that, especially whenever it presents a base or a foundation of our argument and our own personal beliefs. That's just faulty. That's faulty belief. It just doesn't work in any situations, because every single worldview has to have bizarre things in it in order to function. If an atheist says, I do believe something can come out of nothing, there's nothing more bizarre than that, is there? I mean, we believe it too, but we believe that the power behind it made something come from nothing. You believe no power behind it made something come from nothing. You're calling us magical, and you're saying yours isn't magical? That nothing made nothing or something come from nothing? But anyway, so before I get into start talking about how bizarre that is, but it's not bizarre. That's not a bizarre. That's a logical impossibility, that nothing could have nothing come from something in any sense. No matter how many nothings you put behind it, it'll never have produce something. Okay, next one here, and again, you can go to my Patreon. I've got this. It's called a post called "The Good Old Bizarre Argument." Not a long post, and most of the stuff that I just talked about, that's exactly what I went through. But I want to real quickly, I hesitate to do this because, gosh, there's so many strong arguments on it, but it's become a subject of a discussion again within the internet communities, evangelical internet communities, and it just has to do with the global flood. People are talking about it, and they're getting pretty high temperatures about whether or not the flood in Genesis chapter 6 through 9 was global. I just give my opinion on it very quickly. I do think that the flood was global. I do. I think it covered the entire earth. I think all the mountains, the tops of the mountains were covered. It suggests that. In, let's see here. Genesis 8:5 says the waters receded. The waters continued to recede until the 10th month, and on the first day of the 10th month, the tops of the mountains became visible. The mountains were covered, and this was for 10 months. It's very difficult for me to see this as a local flood. I'm not saying it can't be, and I'm not saying there can't be, as some people say, that there is hyperbole spoken, or it is just spoken of in the current world and the current mountains that they know of. That is part of writing in that day. It most certainly is, but I just can't see any mountain being covered for 10 months without it having, there was some, these guys weren't completely ignorant of mountains. There wasn't like only small hills. You might say that, but it's hard to defend. But anyway, the primary argument that I have is not just the Bible. You may say, Michael, what are you talking about? Not just the Bible. It's got to be just the Bible. Well, you remember my chart let's see if I can get to this, my PowerPoint. You remember this here. You've got the stage of truth, and these are all of our sources for truth. This is where we go to as God has spoken to certain degrees in all of these areas. We have said through theology in a year, what we're doing right now, that the Bible, special revelation, is at the front of the stage of truth. Then we have said that we have to use reason. Reason creates the waters that we swim in whenever we are dealing with truth, and so does our experience and our emotions. And then tradition comes and gives another source in nature as well. But anyway, what we do is we kind of take all of these sources and we just kind of we say, what do each one of these sources have to say about our current subject? And so whenever I look at this chart, I see that nature has something to say because science has something to say. And so whenever we're looking through science, you ask the scientists today, was there a global flood? Most of them will say no. Now, I can't tell you exactly why they would, and I'm not super well versed on this. I know enough to, know the basic arguments on every side. But whenever it comes to science, it's not just that I'm not well versed in it. Science exhausts me a whole lot. I mean, it really does. I'm sorry, all of you who are scientists. I'm not undermining any profession, especially with certain types of science that are different than what we're talking about here. But whenever it comes to geology, whenever it comes to medicine, whenever it comes to nutrition, there's just all kinds of things that I see myself as very postmodern on. And I say, you may say this, but there's always changes going on. I don't understand the changes. I don't get to the very foundation of every single point of every single issue and, really know it. I'm not well versed in it. I don't think any scientist is either. I think all scientists are well versed in individual points and then contribute to the whole, but I don't know what all goes into this. All I know is that things change all the time in science. There are paradigm shifts from, even paradigm shifts in physics itself. The whole nature of physics all of a sudden changes. And if the nature of physics is changing, if it changes again, all of a sudden everything that we hold to within science is up for grab. Once we go to the string theory, and it just conflicts with so much that we already know about science, or we thought we knew from Einstein's theory of relativity. And if that is being contradicted here, we've got big problems. There's got to be something that changes. I mean, even in evolution recently in 2014 or 15, at the Royal Science Academy in the British Royal Science meeting, which is a very prestigious meeting, they came in and they said, hey, listen, guys, here's the deal, or a lot of them did. They said, listen, we have got to come up with a new way in which evolution works because Darwinian evolution isn't working out. Okay, survival of the fittest is not working out, and random mutation is not working out. Those do not give us sufficient cause for evolution. So we need to figure out how evolution works without these things, because it's just not going to work out. That's kind of the idea. And of course, that's what I believe. I'm like, it can't work out. I mean, it just can't. But anyway, I'm not a scientist in this area. I just think it's interesting because here we have this paradigm shift. We have a paradigm shift going on in every single area. And so whenever people say this is what we know in science and this is what science tells us, it's not that I completely discount it. I don't mean to be so postmodern, like I said, skeptical about these things. But I think we all should be skeptical about such things, especially whenever there's changing nature of science. So whatever they use to measure things right now doesn't necessarily mean that's the right measurement for back then. This is another point. This is called the uniformitarian principle. The uniformitarian principle says, okay, listen, if we're seeing, what would be a good way to put this? If we see what are those things that come down out of caves, stalactites? If we see these grow 1 inch every 100,000 years right now, that's how we're measuring them, then they must have grown 1 inch every 100,000 years, millions of years ago. Well, how do you know that? How do you know that there wasn't something that changed? Whether it was not in the physics, but in nature itself, what nature was like back before or a million years ago. I mean, it's just our atmosphere could have been different. The way in which things function could have been different. There could have been catastrophe. This is called catastrophism. Catastrophism said there are massive changes that take place on the world's surface due to catastrophe. And so there's all kinds of things that could have happened that would end up, I'm not saying I've got any answers for stalactites, but there's all kinds of things that could be a reason later on, once we discover them, we say, oh, I see, this is the way these things happen. Or we measure back then and we say, nope, they happened much faster back then. And our view of uniformitarianism, how things happen today are the same things, the same way they happened a million years ago, is wrong. I think it is a basic assumption we have to start with in order to understand the past. Because how do we know what things changed? How do we know what catastrophes happened? So basically, we're making an educated guess the best we can, as long as everything stays the same as it was before. Whether that comes to the flood, that has massive implications. Now, they say a worldwide flood didn't happen, but at the same time, here's another problem I have, is how in the world do nations, peoples, ancient peoples all over the world have a flood story, a worldwide flood story, a massive flood story? I mean, even in Hawaii they have them, South America they have them. And so everybody has, over 200 flood stories, I believe it was. This is back whenever I studied it in 1996, but over 200 flood stories, and all of them generally around the same ancient time. I mean, we could say past, 10,000 years ago. All of them, or 15,000 years ago. We're just saying it's in the past. They have an ancient flood story. And so that you're basically saying, okay, everybody has a flood story, yes. And we have the testimony of people. So let's bring this back up. We have science right here that says one thing, scientists today that say one thing, which is strong. And if everything else confirmed it, I think it'd be stronger. But you have tradition that says something different. So basically you got testimony from people that, hundreds of flood stories, hundreds of nations that say a worldwide flood happened, and then they go up against, well, we measure it today to where that could not have happened. I think that's pretty arrogant. I'm not sure I'd put nature above tradition simply because, again, nature has to be interpreted through our own uniformitarian principle, not to say in the least our own agendas. Everybody's got an agenda. Okay, I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theory, and I'm not even arguing for, young Earth and without evolution. Most of this stuff I care very little about. I do, and I know that makes a lot of y'all mad. I'm sorry, but it's not the biggest deal to me. There's bigger fish to fry, and I think there's easier things to defend and establish the center of Christianity. These are interesting. This happens to be my particular opinion. I think a worldwide flood actually happened due to my distrust in science or the uniformitarian principle and scientific agendas, the testimony of people all over the world, and then what the Bible says. Now you say, Michael, why don't you put the Bible first? Well, I do put the Bible first, but I don't put my particular interpretation of the Bible first. You see what I'm saying? There's a lot of people in Christianity that are very good Old Testament scholars who disagree with me and say, nope, this is a cultural thing. Now, in my mind, I think they're finding that easier because they're trying to comport with the natural sciences what they say today. And if the natural sciences said that the flood was worldwide, they would just say, oh yeah, that's what it says, but they're finding ways that you can interpret it. I'm not saying you can't. I'm not saying they're wrong, because you can. The way they wrote back then was different than the way we write, especially with regard to the accuracy that we try to put in our own writings today. So, but anyway, so my interpretation of the Bible here is not that strong. Say a 1 out of 10. How much would I say that this is in the Bible? You must interpret it as a global flood. I would say I am a 2 or a 3. That's how, it's strong enough for me, a 2 or a 3. But whenever it comes to the testimony of people all around the world, I'm probably a 4 or a 5. And then whenever it comes to nature itself and the uniformitarian principle, I may be a 2 or 3. But in the end, you kind of add it up, and I've got more evidence that is pointing to a global flood in my methodology than I do for a local flood. So hopefully you can see how I did that, especially those of you who have been going through theology in a year with me. I think that probably makes more sense to you guys. But let's see here. Okay, next, which I've gone through 2 things. I haven't even gotten any of the theology in the news. This is theology in my news. Real quick, I'm just going to talk about this because I wrote about it recently. But this is my debate with Barack Obama. I did one time, believe it or not, in 2007, debate Barack Obama over the phone as a radio program had us both in, and he was arguing for abortion. I was arguing against abortion. I did not know who Barack Obama was. This radio program called me and said, hey, listen, we're doing this, and this is who we're having. They did say he was a Democratic primary candidate, but, those are a dime a dozen most of the time, just like, Republican primary president or candidates, and it was before he had been chosen. And so I was waiting in the waiting room with them. We hung out and, said a few words to each other. That was about it. Then we got on and gave our respective debates. I thought that was funny. That's interesting. And it is true. It is true, unless somehow I just made that up and I had a dream about it. But that is true. I often forget about that. But it was over my Traducian argument for the existence of the soul. My belief that the parents are responsible. God creates the soul the same way he creates the body, in and with the parents. The parents create the soul just like they create the body. So they are ultimately responsible. And my basic argument in theology is this, the implications of it. Now, mind you, I am not a Traducianist, which basically means source. The parents are the source of the soul. But I am a Traducianist, not because I want to defend abortion. I want to make that really, really clear. My theology comes first, the implications come second. But the implications for abortion are incredibly strong from a Traducian argument, which I think is by far the best argument for the existence of the soul. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But if you are a Traducian, I don't know any way that you can say that a person does not have a soul at the time of conception. Now, you may say that a soul doesn't make personhood. That usually isn't part of it, but you may argue that, but you have to say that a person has a soul at conception. Why? Because the parents come together, and the moment the physical come into existence, the physicality of a person, the zygotes begin to split. The moment conception begins, is the moment the soul begins, because the soul is again created in and with the body by the parents. And you say, is it by the parent's soul? Well, in a way, but you got to understand that it's a unified whole. We weren't meant to split into two whenever we die. This is the grace of God that he keeps us in existence by taking our soul in a waiting place to where we wait with him for the resurrection of the body so that we can have our body back and be a complete person again. That is our situation. God is gracious to us to let our soul remain in a state of existence. But it wasn't supposed to be this way, because the soul and the body in its natural form were not meant to be distinguished. So set that aside. The two views that I'm talking about here are with regard to the creation of the soul. And the question is this: how did the soul come into being? Number one, the creationist standpoint. This doesn't have to do with creationism as we were talking about it beforehand, creation of the earth. Again, it's called creation of the soul at this point. So whenever you say you're a creationist, you say, I'm a creationist with regard to the existence of the soul. That's how you'd put it. Because if you just said I'm a creationist, they would think that you believe in special creation of all material by God at the very beginning. But the creation of the soul, creationists believe that God creates the soul individually, and then at some point, most of them would say at conception, but at some point place the soul in the body. And there's various reasons for this, but the primary reason has to do with just the very fact that people cannot conceive of material beings creating an immaterial constitution, the soul. In other words, material creates material, and spiritual creates spiritual. But the problem is the people who create me and my wife, whenever we had children, both of us had souls. And so therefore our souls went into these children. They get a piece of our soul. The soul is passed on. From Adam, God created, wait a minute, let me go through, I'm just going through the problems of this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. But from Adam, God created all things. In 6 days, he created all things. It was done. He's not creating souls right now every time somebody is born. He didn't create souls at the very beginning, and they're sitting up there in a storehouse waiting to be placed in the body. That's very problematic. I mean, that's what Mormons believe, but that doesn't make it wrong, but it's very problematic for a lot of reasons. But what we have is a situation where God created the world and it was very good. And the very good includes the soul. It includes the immaterial aspect of us that was never meant to be breached, that was never meant to be have death and be separated from the body. But a lot of people believe it this way. They would say, well, God is the only one who can create the soul because the soul is so great. The soul is the best. Spirit, the soul, number one. Body, yeah, it's good, but it's number two. It's not that great. This is called Gnosticism or dualism, Gnostic dualism. Gnostic dualism is an old philosophy that gets into our world all the time in various ways, multiple ways, but in this case, through this particular issue. Gnostic dualism says this: everything spiritual is good, everything physical is bad. Or maybe they won't go that far with it, but you get my point. Better, worse, right? Everything spiritual is good. The Gnostics back in Christ's day, or just after Christ's day, like whenever 1 John was being written, you can see he's fighting against Gnostic dualism because they said basically this: Christ could not have been man. He could have been God. Did you know that? That was the first heresy. They did not say he wasn't God, or at least the first heresy among the Greeks. They did not say he was not God. They say, okay, we can accept that he's God, but we can't accept that he came in the flesh because flesh is bad. Why would God pollute himself with flesh? That's dualism. And what they said was that it just seemed like, this is called Docetism. I know I'm giving a lot of big words here. Docetism. Dokeo means to seem or to think. It only seemed like Christ was man. It only seemed like he made footprints whenever he walked. But he really didn't. It wasn't a physical element that did that, because he could not have been physical, because physical is bad. As a matter of fact, the Gnosticism had to have this demiurge, this God that created emanations of himself all the way down to get far enough away from himself to have this last God create the physical. And that last God was the Old Testament God. So the Old Testament God was this one that God created, all the way down to get far enough away from the spiritual so that they were okay with them creating the physical. It was a big philosophy. And again, like I said, the entirety of First John was dealing with it whenever he's talking about Christ, whom our eyes have seen, whom our hands have handled, saying, we know he was really physical. But Gnostic dualism permeates all of history. It is something that Christianity is firmly against. We believe very much in the goodness of creation. We believe that it was very good. We believe that in the future, we will be back with our bodies forever, not to be separated again from our bodies, forever in a physical world. We believe that Christ himself is forever physical. He has joined himself to man forever. Now, if you're going to say that the body is bad, how are you going to say that? I mean, how can you say that God, what he created and called very good, is not really that great? I mean, the spirit that he creates by himself up there, outside of the physical, that's really good. We have no justification for that whatsoever. As a matter of fact, every justification against it. Christianity is unique in that we see the material world is incredible, worth preserving, worth appreciating, worth loving, so much so that our afterlife is not some ethereal nirvana or playing harps on clouds, but back here on the earth, restored, the physical world restored forever, enjoying the way God has made things here in the physical world. So we are not Gnostic dualists. I think the view of creationism often says the soul is too great. God must have created that. And then he left the creation of the physical to man, as if that's not really that great. I mean, it's just such a devaluing of our worldview. I'm not saying that every creationist does this, though, because there are a lot of really good creationists. I believe John Calvin was a creationist with regard to the soul. I don't think I haven't really read his particular arguments. I've just heard that quite a bit. So every time it gets brought up, he's brought up as an example. But, there's good people on both sides. I think Jonathan Edwards was a creationist. Martin Luther was a Traducianist. Gregory of Nyssa was a Traducianist. St. Augustine was a creationist, I believe. I'm not sure about St. Augustine, though. Anyway, what I'm saying is there's good people on both sides, so don't take my extreme talk here and how passionate I get to say this is how, number one, important it is, and if you do not believe the way Michael does, you're not really a true Christian. That's not what I'm saying at all. I am passionate about it because I really think it makes a lot of sense, and it has implications, because if the parents create the soul, there is never a time outside of once conception happens that a person does not have a soul. The soul is built and grows in and with the body. It is in seed form, the soul is, and the soul grows just like the body does, because it is in and with. It is connected, vitally connected to the body. Well, anyway, I have gone long enough already. I did not mean to go this far. I didn't even get to any other news besides the news about my articles, which are the current events in my blogosphere. But that's the best news anyway. All the other news, evangelical concerns about AI. Let's see here. What else was I had? Christian debates on Christian nationalism. And that one's, God, it has too many political ramifications, even though that's a lot in the news. Christian nationalism. And well, although I do have opinions on it, and some of them very strong opinions, I'm glad I ran out of time, because now I can't get criticized. Every time I do something that even hints at political stuff on Theology Unplugged, I have a lot of my more progressive friends that come in and give downvotes and hurt my rankings. That's what happened one time. We did something on race back in 2017, me and Carrie and Clint, and we had just a barrage of people on Apple Podcast who gave us 1 star and just ripped us for being too conservative. So anyway, I mean, what would you think? I mean, I'm very conservative theologically, as you guys know, even though I try to represent a balanced view. But politically, I just say that I am very conservative as well. So a lot of my opinions will go in that direction if I were to speak on politics. But we're not speaking on politics today, so thank you guys for joining. Please, once again, give me support by going to patreon.com/C Michael Patton. Become a patron. You can just take a picture of that and then click on the website that comes up. That is the easiest way to do it. My patron is very active. All of these articles that I've talked about, like I said, are on my Patreon. So you can see that and tons more. I think I've already got like 600 or 700 articles on Patreon and, 3,000 on credohouse.org. Anyway, guys, thank you so much. We'll see you next time.
Theology